Just a fair warning before the video begins, this video will not be spoiler free. I'll be going over my thoughts of this book, including spoilers. So, I finished reading The Last Argument of Kings. I finished reading this book quite a while ago. I kind of left it to sit on my mind, to stew, for me to think about it, for me to go over the things I liked about it, things I didn't like about it. And this video, is just kind of going to be not just about this book, it's going to be about the trilogy as a whole, because it's kind of difficult to just think about this book as a standalone thing, like you can with the others, because this is the culmination of the series of books. So, I suppose I'll talk about my overall thoughts throughout the whole series as well, and how it kind of connects into what I thought about this book. We'll get this out of the way. I loved this book. I loved the trilogy. I thought the trilogy was absolutely fantastic. I think it's a phenomenal fantasy series. So yeah, I think I'll go on now and I'll talk about all the things I liked about this book and the series as a whole. I'm going to try and keep this one more concise than the others. I've said that every time. This time I'm actually really going to try to do so. So I've actually written up a bit of a script and I'm going to kind of talk around some points that I've written out. I'm not just going to completely and utterly wing it. So hopefully this one will be a bit more concise. Before we go any further, I want to say I called it in this clip here. For me, a couple of predictions. I'm fairly sure Baez has this whole fucking thing planned. Every little thing that's happening in his books, I think is part of Baez's great plan. It's pretty clear to me that he is grooming Jezal for leadership, so I don't know if he's planning on like overthrowing the government and putting Jezal as the leader. I think that Baez, so far, he's kind of a kingmaker. I mean, it's a pattern of behaviour at this point for Baez to be doing that. I think that the seed will be in the next book, and I think that they're going to find it, and I think it'll be in the House of the Maker. The Feared, I think that the only person it makes sense who could take the Feared out would be the Bloody Nine. I think in the next book there's going to be a super cool showdown between the Bloody Nine and the Feared, and that would be fucking sick. I suspect Major West is going to end up the head of the army at some point, because it looks like Marshall, or whatever his name is going to die. I think Jezal possibly becoming king is my main prediction. I think Baez has this whole thing planned out. I don't think he's had a setback with not being able to find the seed, but once they find it, he'll be back on track. And I think Baez is he's one step ahead of everyone else. As you can see, I made a few predictions about this book, and I was right about quite a few of them. Pretty proud about that. Just plugging that in there just to make sure that people know this is the first one you're watching. Called all the plot twists. I'm just that good. I also want to say another thing before I continue about something that I said in a previous video. In a previous video I said that I'm not usually a big fan of grimdark. I'm not usually a big fan of when a story kind of has things bad happen for the sake of it. When characters just get killed off for the sake of it, when things are hopeless and fucked up beyond repair. And to be honest with you, after finishing this story, this series of books, I'm not really sure I consider it to be grimdark. When I think of grimdark, I think of Warhammer 40k. I've tried to read the Warhammer 40k books in the past, and one of the reasons I can't really get into them is I can't really get attached to any of the characters. You see, they just kind of exist to be fucked up individuals in a fucked up world. No, I really like the setting of Warhammer 40k, and I think it's really cool. The storytelling within it never really gripped me that much. Now, I am going to try reading the Horus Heresy books again. I did read the first 3 years ago, and I never thought they were that great. But I will give them another shot. That being said, what really turned me off from those books is the lack of meaningful hardship that the characters go through that isn't just very one-dimensional, this is fucked up and bad, right? Whereas this story is not like that at all, and to me that's kind of what makes something grimdark. This story ends on an almost hopeful note. Hopeful's probably stretching the word a little bit, but it's a sad, somber ending for many of these characters. many of these characters don't get a good outcome. But it ends on a small acceptance of the fact that things can get better, and that the characters, even in this world, despite the way that it is, that it can change for the better, that if they try, they can make some small steps towards a better future. I think the takeaway from this book is that change is hard. Change is really hard. It's hard to change yourself. It's hard to become a better person. It's hard to escape from your circumstances. It's hard to put your past behind you. It's hard to forgive yourself. It's hard to move on from doing terrible things and to change as a person and become better and to rise above the situation that you're in. And many of the characters in this story fail to do that, and I think that's deliberate. That's a deliberate exploration of the dark side of that theme. What happens when someone fails to choose to make the right decision? But it also leans into what can a powerless weakling do to try and do a little bit to make the world a better place, at least to control their actions if they're unable to make any systemic changes. And I actually thought that the end of the story was somewhat hopeful, and I'm not necessarily sure I even really consider it to be grimdark after finishing this. But then again, maybe I just don't really understand the genre of grimdark. I don't know, to me what makes something grimdark is it is almost overpoweringly fucked and terrible and everything is bad. And you know, Warhammer 40k is the big example. I mean, it did literally create the term, to my knowledge. But I was told these books are grimdark, and after finishing them I just don't think they are. I think they're very dark and they're very grim, but ultimately there's a story of hope in there, of a glimmer, an ember of the possibility of things getting better and the world being a better place and people maybe possibly being able to rise above who they were the day before. And I think that was a very powerful message. And the fact that I think if this story didn't have such a fucked up ending and such a dark and gritty and dogged determination to follow the stories to a realistic conclusion, I don't think it would have landed. So I'm quite happy it had the ending it did. I actually really loved the ending of this book. So yeah, so not really sure this is grimdark after reading it, and I just thought that overall it has quite a little bit of a hopeful message. You know, there's this saying, and that is that brighter lights cast harsher shadows, but the opposite is also true, right? A small light burns brighter in the dark, and that is what I liked about this story. It's the small moments of goodness, of hope, that shine all the brighter because of how dark the story is. And that was really my biggest takeaway from this book, was the idea that change is hard, and that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to do it, that we shouldn't believe in it, and it doesn't mean that the world can't get better. Just because we go through an entire trilogy and things only get better a little bit doesn't mean we should give up on the idea of making the world a better place. And that was kind of my ultimate takeaway from this story. And I'm going to go on to talk about all the things I liked individually about these books. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about the plot. And to be honest with you, I'm not going to talk about this too much because the plot isn't what makes these books great. But I want to say that despite that, I really love the plot in this book. This isn't going to be a rant about it like I have in the previous books. In the previous videos, sorry, I kind of talked quite extensively about the plot lines. But I just want to say in this one, I enjoyed all the major plot lines. I can't really choose a favourite, from Jazal's orchestrated ascension to the throne, bloody Logan's trail across the north and south and back again, Glocta's struggle for survival, as a pawn in what is essentially an unwinnable game, Dogman's slow realization of the reality of his relationship with Logan and the nature of how he's chosen to live his life, and Major West to try and do his best to keep as many people alive as he can, while also hating himself for it. Pharaoh's final achievement of cold, meaningless revenge, which is ultimately what she achieves in this book. All of these storylines I thought were great. The book is full of awesome set-piece moments. Battles are incredible. Some of the fights are absolutely butthole clenching. Logan versus the Feared, especially a standout scene. Some of the moments in this book absolutely just make you put the book down for a moment. You know, fucking Logan killing Toldaroo, Grim dying towards the end. Jazal's entire fucking character arc in this book, to me, was just absolutely brilliant. But I guess I'll talk about that later. But his storyline, the slow unraveling of Bayaz's plot, and the truth of the fact that everyone is just a pawn and him and his enemy's game, a meaningless game for revenge, just simply driven by hatred of one another. And most importantly, the plot of this book was very well in service to its themes and to the characters that were living that story. This book's plot never really felt like a plot in a normal sense. It simply felt like the characters were acting as they would and should, and things happened around them in a realistic fashion, and it just felt like you're watching historical events play out. And really, that's kind of why I don't really want to rant about the plot too much, because the book doesn't feel much like it has a plot in the normal sense. It's not like a Brandon Sanderson book where you can see the plot unfolding and all these little things connect together. No, it's a very simple A to B of a character's history and journey in their life. And in that way, it's a very character-driven story. It is deeply intimate. You really get to know these characters in a way that you will not in many series of books. You will not many authors offer this to this degree, in my view. And, you know, overall, the story, the plot, whatever you want to call it, was just absolutely brilliant. And although it did have a bit of a slow start, there's no point denying that, the start was a bit slow, especially after the bombshell that was the ending of the last book. But by God, does it get rolling, and when it gets rolling, it does not stop. This book has endless plot momentum. The plot just gets faster and faster and faster, and it goes. So, yeah, the plot was great. That's all I have to say about this part of the book. This is going to be probably the most lengthy bit, I think. And this is the characters and the culmination of their arcs. Not much has changed in terms of my enjoyment from the previous book. The character work is as phenomenal as it has ever been. The characters have these incredibly distinct inner voices, and they're each horrifyingly visceral and beautifully realised. Joe Abercrombie's character writing is absolutely fucking incredible. In every way, the dialogue is brilliant. The characters feel real. They feel visceral. They're both larger than life, yet beautifully grounded in reality at the same time, in a way that not many authors have managed when you're talking about the kinds of characters that we're talking about here. And you have to remember that the characters in these books, no major character, no main character ever dies, right? And yet the stakes never ever feel like they aren't there. It always feels like something could go wrong. And what Joe Abercrombie does is he makes you fear what happens to these characters more than their death. The things that happen to these characters, it's worse than death. And this is a really great writing tool that I think really great authors are able to use, where they realise that killing off a character doesn't necessarily result in a stronger story. A lot of the time it does, okay? There's times when it's relevant to do that, but a viewpoint character, it's not as a good idea to kill off a viewpoint character, because they will be less interesting if they didn't suffer through more stuff. And that is basically what Joe Abercrombie is so great at. Joe Abercrombie is simply a master of character writing, in my opinion. Just absolutely fucking phenomenal. But since this is the last book, I've got to talk about them all in context. So, where did all the characters end up? And how did their stories end, right? Well, they all have somewhat of an open-ended ending. Glocta and Jazal's is the most closely tied. Jazal eventually bends the knee to Bayaz, and Glocta suggests that he can do a little good with his power in ways that Bayaz might not notice, which is kind of what I was talking about, and I said there was kind of a hopeful glimmer in this grim ending of a story, but ultimately a very fitting one, I thought. Pharaoh is ultimately changed by the events of the book forever, and she runs off to kill a ton of fucking Gurkish with her newly found powers that she gets from the ritual that she undergoes with Bayaz. And it's a sad ending. It's a sad ending for this character, who was this close to escaping the cycle of violence through her relationship with Logan, but because they're both too damaged individuals, they couldn't reach out and help each other, and so they both continue down a bloody path. It's presented to me, how I read it, is as a failure on her part to escape her hunger for vengeance, and eventually it consumes her entirely, and it was a very somber but brilliant ending to her character arc, I thought. Dogman. Dogman's story ends with him alone. All of his friends dead besides Logan, and Logan asks him to stay in the South and build relationships with the Southerners on his behalf. It's somewhat of a hopeful ending for Dogman. His dogged loyalty to his friend is, in my view, what kept him in this life of violence for so long. He chose to be loyal to Logan, and he couldn't have chosen a bloodier master, unfortunately. But there's a bit of glimmer of hope here, in that he has the opportunity he needs now to stay in the South to change his life from a meaningless life of violence, hopefully maybe to a meaningful life of violence, and if not that, to leave the violence behind. That I somehow doubt that will happen, because this is the first law we're talking about afterwards, and there is another series of books, and I suspect he will be in them, and I suspect he will not be leaving violence behind once and for all. And then obviously there's Logan. Logan has the most open-ended ending to his story. He runs from a duel to the death, which, you know, is perhaps symbolic of him finally growing tired of a life of violence, but I kind of doubt it. Well, he already is tired of his life of violence. He's been tired of it for a very long time, but he's kind of going through the motions is all he knows. And Logan is kind of what I was talking about earlier when I said it's hard. You know, it's hard to overcome who you are. To Logan, violence is simply the tool by which he has done everything in his life, right? It's his first stop solution to everything. It's the only way he knows to resolve anything, with violence, with aggression. And this is the first time we see Logan go, fuck this, I'm just getting out of here. Hopefully, I hope Logan, I'm assuming he'll turn up in another book, escapes his life of violence. That's all I hope. Presumably his story will continue. I did think this was probably the weakest ending to all the character arcs, but I did think it was still a pretty great ending. It was really cool to see him go to the north, see him get confronted by Black Dow and almost die, and kind of essentially fail to get revenge on Scale and whatnot for what they did to his family, so or rather choose not to. So, and then there is Major West. Major West's story is one of failing to forgive yourself, I think, for the things that you've done. Major West is a flawed character, and to me, by the end of the series, he was one of the strongest characters. I put him up there with Glocta, Jazal, and Logan, with Pharaoh and Dogman kind of being second tier in quality to them. Major West spends the entire series trying to do the best that he can to reduce the amount of suffering and deaths as much as he can, but he's plagued with an anger management issue that he has little control of. Now, the problem with Major West is because he's a good person, deep down, when he does bad things, he fucking hates himself for it. And this is kind of where we end with him at the end of the books, where he's dying of radiation poisoning, essentially, from being near the giant magical ritual that Bayaz pulls off to annihilate the Eaters. in his dying moments, well, not necessarily his dying moments, but the last time we see him, he laments that this is maybe a punishment for his sins. This is a very sad ending for a person whose heart is in the right place. Obviously, Major West did a lot of bad things, right? He killed someone in cold blood, and also he beat the shit out of his sister. He domestically abused his sister, there's no other way to put it, in a fit of rage. And obviously these are terrible things, and he should feel bad about them. But he also does great things at the same time. He keeps the people going through war, the people who are loyal to him, who answer to him, and ultimately he's the most heroic of all the characters besides Jazal, in my view, in this story. Except, unlike Jazal, he comes to the wrong conclusion, I think, and he refuses to accept the good that he's done and simply hates himself for all of the bad things that he's done, and is unable to see the good things that he did, and he's unable to come to terms with who he is and what he's done. And again, this reinforces that theme to me, that change is difficult. He could have chosen to change and put effort into controlling his temper and controlling his anger and becoming a better person and tempering himself, but instead he chose the easy path of self-pity. And overall, a really sad ending for Major West, as he presumably dies. Since the last time we see him, he's dragged away from Glocta and basically just throwing up and looks like he's on death's door. So we can only assume that he dies as a result of his illness. The character work in these books is phenomenal. Jazal, for me, is strongly the standout character. I know a lot of people don't like Jazal as a character from what I've seen online, but for me, he is the strongest character in this book by a significant margin. I really just loved seeing him accept that he's a coward, but at the same time seeing him try to rail against his cowardice and do the right thing at multiple moments was uplifting. Out of all of the characters in the story, Jazal is the one who tries the hardest and makes the most success actually trying to do the right thing. And I think that what makes Jazal's attempts to be a better person so compelling is the fact that he is such a shitty person. Other characters in the story aren't so irredeemably shit at their core. They couldn't change, you know? Jazal at his core is a coward who doesn't care that much about others. Well, he does until it inconveniences him, and he's the only one who actually fucking tries to do something about it. And even at the end, he tries to stand up to Baez, and Baez puts him down. For me, it was the best character arc by far. Probably followed by Logan, Glocta, and Major West, who I'd all put on the same kind of level as one another. And then Pharaoh and Dogman following. Yeah, I just want to say I loved all these characters for different reasons. They all left their mark on me. I think they all serve a thematic purpose within the story that's very clear, that's very distinct, that's very well done. Ultimately, to reinforce this theme that was very clear to me throughout the series, which is that change is hard. There's very different kinds of change. There's Jazal's attempt to change himself and become a better person. There is Logan's attempt to overcome his past and move beyond who he was, and he ultimately fails to do that. Glocta is unable to understand why he has become so wretched and so monstrous, and he's unable to do anything about that. He's unable to reconcile his past, and he ultimately falls into a deeper level of depravity, and serves to further reinforce this theme that change is difficult. Pharaoh again fails to choose to make the right decisions in the most important moments. At the end, when she was given the option to end this cycle of violence, this cycle of revenge, she chose not to, and she chose to go through with it, and it has permanently changed her and possibly destroyed her. And it's impossible to say for sure what will happen to her, but I think it's quite clear that it won't be good. And it's quite clear that her story is one of failing yet again. A failure to change, to reinforce this theme that change is very fucking hard. And Baez represents the system. He represents the cage that's around us all, our situation, that makes it so difficult for us to change and to be better and to move towards a better world, you know, or a better version of ourselves, or even just a more happy, content version of ourselves. And all these characters serve to feed that theme, in my view, and they were all brilliantly done. I thought that there were moments in this book that made me tear up. There were moments that made me laugh with joy. There were moments that made me want to punch Joe Abercrombie in the face. You know, this book gave me the whole emotional rodeo, and it's all because of these characters. It's the characters that made that possible. And I'll say it again, I'll keep saying it until it's worn out. Joe Abercrombie is a master of character writing. At least this series is. I've not read any of his other books, but this series is a master. He is just a master of it. Absolutely phenomenal. And these books live up to the hype on the character writing alone. Yeah, so the characters and the culmination of their arcs. I think this is the strongest element of the books, because it feeds into these important themes and ideas that run through the whole series. Yeah, just absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant cast of characters. The next thing I want to praise about this series, and this book specifically, is making me love the evil bastards. None of the characters in these books are a good person. You know, there's an argument that Major West, at his core, is his heart's in the right place, but he's still the things that you can't ignore, the things that he's done that make him a bad person, and his personal failures that make him even worse. And despite all this book made me love every character. The three of them ended up being totally evil fuckers, but I loved them anyway. Joe made me love each of these wretched bastards, something that very few authors have ever pulled off for me. I've always said that there are three ingredients for making a good character. In my view, I call these the character triad. And the first is depth, which is giving a character depth. It's a surefire way to make a lovable character, but it's probably the hardest way to do it. And the second is basic likability. And there are loads of ways to do this. Give a character enough charm, you know, lovable personality, some traits, epic moments, and they can become a great character on this factor alone by way of your storytelling. And the third is development. You can take any character, you start them as a barely likable pustule of a creature, and you develop them over time into a great character. This is also pretty hard to pull off compared to basic likability, which is why most characters are likable on the basic likability level. If your character is too vile or unlikable to begin with, you might turn readers off before they're able to get to the height of their character arcs. They've done well. This is one of the best ways to make a good character, in my view. And really, you just need to do one of these well to make a great character. And absolutely brilliant characters have a bit of multiple, and some really great writers are able to make characters that have a healthy dose of all three. But really, is one of these you need to generally nail to end up with a good character that people will gravitate towards and enjoy. And I think Joe Abercrombie does all three extremely well with every single character in this book. And that is not easy, okay? That is not a minor thing. That is very impressive, in my view. Logan most strongly embodies basic likability with his epic action scenes, his likable personality, his charisma, which he has in buckets. His relationship with others as well allows his personality to shine very well. And you can't help but love the guy despite everything that he is evil. But he also has depth. And he also develops significantly as a person. Not always in a good direction, but he does throughout the book, right? Glocta embodies depth most strongly, I would say. And his depth is what makes him so lovable, despite the fact that he's so horrid. And it mostly comes in the form of his moral complexity and the moral ambiguity of his actions, right? But he also develops significantly. And also, he's very charismatic as a character and very funny and very witty. And that makes him very fun to read from the perspective of. And Jazal most strongly embodies character development. He begins as a whatever character, a funny but insufferable twat of a narcissist in the first book, but he develops into a flawed and naive but well-meaning king, even if he's a coward at his core, and that journey is absolutely phenomenal to read from the perspective of. And on top of that, he is still charismatic. He's an arsehole in the first book, but goddamn if he ain't entertaining to read from the perspective of. Reading Jazal wax on about how brilliant his jaw is in that one chapter in the first book still sticks in my mind so well, where he's sat there and he's talking about his jaw, his wonderful jaw. Perhaps some heroes and kings have had a jaw so nice. Absolutely fucking buckets and buckets of charm as a character, and on top of that you kind of love to hate him in the first book and a little bit in the second book as well. He's also got depth as well to his character. He's got so many things that feed into why he is the way he is, right? And that depth really comes to the fore when he changes, so it ties really strongly into his character development. And you know, Joe Abercrombie's just done this with all the characters. All of the characters have all these important things in buckets, okay? You know, take other great writers like George R. R. Martin or Brandon Sanderson, okay? And I think of these guys, and I think generally Brandon Sanderson, you know, he's able to nail 2 per character. There aren't many characters in anything that I've read that he's written that have nailed all 3, okay? I think for Vin, for example, in Mistborn, okay, she has a lot of development and depth, but she's not that likable to start off with. She becomes likable throughout the book because you become attached to her, but she's not got like a crazy cool, quippy, charismatic personality, really. She's actually quite a bit of a wet blanket charisma wise, okay? And that's fine because it's part of her character, but ultimately she doesn't touch on all 3 in fully, right, in my view. Kelsey is the same. Kelsey has he has a lot of likability and quite a bit of depth in my view, but he doesn't really have any development. He's not there for long enough to develop as a character. So, you know, these things, most authors aren't able to slap these down in all 3, and I think that George R. R. Martin is a really good example of this. His characters have a lot of depth, and a lot of them have a lot of charisma, buckets of charisma. George R. R. Martin's really good at that. His dialogue is phenomenal, and his characters are very likable. Everyone loves Tyrion, right? But a lot of the time, a lot of them don't live long enough to really get the depth you want, okay? A lot of them do. A lot of the, not the depth, the development you want. Some of them do. There are some characters in the Game of Thrones series, Song of Ice and Fire, sorry, like Jaime, for example. Some would say Arya. I didn't really like Arya that much, but you know, Sansa definitely, who really, and Dany, who go through a lot of character development. But again, I would argue a lot of these characters lack one of these 3, and you know, I think it's very, very impressive for Joe Abercrombie to be able to write to write characters as all 3 of these in buckets, in my view, and consistently every viewpoint character has this. Every viewpoint character, in my view, has all 3 of these to a significant degree, which makes them very impressive from a writing perspective, in my view. Yeah, so just making me love the evil bastards and the character writing. Kind of a similar point to the last one, but making me love these characters despite how shitty they are, in a way that no one ever has before. The next is this dogged determination to follow Grimness to its grimmest conclusion. Necessarily, I don't really consider these books to be grim-dark. No, I don't. But they are grim, and they are dark. But not overly so, right? They're more grim than they are dark, I would say. Because everything that can go wrong will go wrong in these books. You watch this downward spiral of events, and sometimes it's eye-wateringly painful, yet wonderfully cathartic and engaging to see these characters go through what they go through, right? In the end, Glocta and Jazal end up in places of ultimate power, yet it's a terrible outcome for both of them, because they're ultimately pawns, and they're ultimately unable to do what they want to do. Both have less freedom than before, and arguably in worse positions in life than before the beginning of the books, despite their new stations and peaks of power. Glocta is removed from a situation where he can improve as a person, forcing him to engage further ruthless behaviour and depravity in order to please his new master, and in order to keep himself safe, and his new wife safe, right? Jazal too is robbed of the potential to change the world as he desired throughout the second book and early into his time as king by Bayaz, and is forced at every turn to abandon his big ideas of improving life for the average person. And Logan's story ends as it began, in a battle to the death that he narrowly escapes by jumping off an elevated surface, ultimately representing the fact that he has made little to no progress in improving his lot in life. In fact, he's probably made it worse. He's basically where he started, right? Farah is consumed by her desires for revenge and is literally corrupted to it, and Wes dies of radiation poisoning caused by the seed. A tragic ending for a decent enough man who sought redemption for his crimes. It is tragic, yet true, ruthlessly realistic at the same time. The way that he just follows this story to its ultimate conclusion. None of these main characters apart from Wes die. None of them die. You don't need to kill characters off to write an incredible fucking character arc, okay? Killing characters off when you have characters this good is a waste of potential, because if one of those characters is gone, you're cutting a quarter of the potential of your book out and chucking it in the fucking bin. Okay, it might make a lasting impression, and fair enough, you can probably pull this off in the last book, because you've not got that many, you've only got like 300 pages left of your whole series, right? But if you'd killed any of these characters off in the first or second book, you would have a far less interesting book than the others, and instead he follows a determined grim path for all of these characters. They forge a path of grimness throughout their life that is dark and depressing, and ultimately serves the themes and ideas of this story and absolutely nails it the whole time. This determination to follow everything to its grimmest conclusion without just ending it early, absolutely love it. It's one of the things that I love about the Dresden Files as well, which is a series of books I really like. The characters being forged through like a piece of steel at an anvil through the fires of grim, horrible shit happening to them, pounding them time and time again, forging them into the ultimate version of themselves, is a absolutely brilliant way of writing that I really love to see. I don't I love George R. R. Martin's writing. His actual writing, his characters are phenomenal, yet so often he kills characters off before they can reach the height of what they have to offer to us as characters, thematically and within the story. I understand that he's trying to create an air of not being sure who's going to die, but to me it just became so clear so early in who was and wasn't going to die, because I could see who had no plot armor whatsoever and would killed on the whim, and what characters had all the plot armor in the world and could never die. So this kind of doesn't really work for me. This is a far better way to do that, in my view. This is a superior, refined version of the same kind of storytelling, and it's a better way of doing grim worlds and storytelling, in my view. The next is undermining tropes at every turn. Now, this isn't something that I like for the sake of it, generally speaking, okay? There are a lot of, I'm a big anime fan, and I watch a lot of anime, and there's a lot of anime where they'll do this thing, where they have this cliche or trope, and they do it right in your face, and then the character go, "Whoa, that's the falling over into the girl's underwear trope, so done," and it's like, you just did it though. You just did it though. You can't just do it and have someone go, that's stupid, okay? That's not what these books do, right? That's what so many people are trying to deconstruct ideas. That's what they do. You know, they do kind of point out that this is a trope and everything, but they don't ultimately do anything with it. And you know, as a person, I don't think there's anything wrong with tropes. I think tropes are storytelling devices. It's about how you use a trope when you use a trope, and you know, a cliche or whatever. When you use a trope, I mean, there's a difference between a trope and a cliche, but we'll get into that. But the you know, tropes are just tropes ultimately become part of storytelling because tropes are real life things. They're common things that happen time and time again. You know, we all know a guy or a girl who constantly ends up with women or men or whatever that treat them like shit, and then they just end up just going back to terrible people, and eventually you realize this is a trope of their life, right? It's a recurring thing that keeps happening, and then you meet someone else who's like that, and someone else who's like that, and you realize, oh, this is a real life trope. It's a thing that happens, and that's all that tropes are, in my view. But it really is difficult to undermine them in a meaningful way, and this book lives and breathes on the undermining of tropes. Where in other stories this feels performative, as if the author is looking down at their nose at other authors with a superior tone. If it's right at home in these books in a way that feels like a love letter to the genre, you have to truly understand the theme and storytelling idea to subvert it correctly. And for me, these books exemplify Joe Abercrombie's mastery of the storytelling craft and of you know, fantasy as a genre. Because he basically does a lot of things that have been done before, and he undermines them or changes them or twists them in a way that's interesting time and time again throughout the books. Now obviously that's not to say that these books are devoid of tropes. They're not devoid of tropes. Byers himself, being the evil mastermind behind everything, is pretty much the most common trope there is, but it was done very fucking well. You know, Byers is essentially just a magical Bond villain. I mean, and Joe Abercrombie did him very fucking well. So, you know, these books aren't devoid of tropes, but I did think that the way that he undermines tropes is very telling of how well he understood the genre. And yeah, I just wanted to talk about that. I thought that was great. This is less a thing that I loved about this book specifically and about the whole series as a whole, and that is moral complexity. This is best expressed through Glockter, I think. The characters are bad people when you look at them from the outside, but when you get to know them and understand their struggles, it stops them from being so black and white. Okay, I'm not saying they're good people, because they're not. But I love that this book constantly made me reassess my view of each character as a hero or a villain, until by the end the line was so blurred that I couldn't even tell who were the good guys or the bad guys. This book forces you to reassess your views of morality. It slowly pushes you towards becoming apologetic for the awful things these characters do through their raw and unfiltered, gritty realism of their stories. In one part of my mind, I see objectively the awful things they've done. On the other hand, I become attached to them and can't help but try to make excuses for their behaviour, their abuses, their crimes. Right? Eventually, you are forced to conclude: do I even know what is right or wrong? Even if the things that these people have done are bad, can I really blame them for the situation? To truly exemplify this, I could argue for eternity the moral complexity of these characters and each action they take throughout the books, and that says a lot. It really says a lot. You know, part of me is like, if I was in Glockter's situation and I got tortured for eternity in a prison, would I be any better? But then I'm like, but does that absolve him of his sin? Does that make him less bad? Does it move him from black to kind of morally grey? Or does it not do his actions not... Does his past not matter? Does it not justify anything he does at any point? Clearly he's traumatized. Clearly he's dissociating from the world around him. He's permanently damaged psychologically and deeply. Does that justify any of his actions? No. Part of me says no, it doesn't. It doesn't justify actions. You cannot justify your actions just because you were drunk or you were inebriated or because you had a serious psychological issue going on at the time. But at the same time, it is a bit of a justification though, isn't it? It does dampen the evilness. It does make it a bit less bad. You know, even we recognize that within the law, right? People don't have proper reasoning skills because something might be stopping them from being able to reason. You know, we can just go on about this forever and ever, you know. And this is really, you know, it's moral complexity, not moral ambiguity. Okay, moral ambiguity is when it's not clear who's right in the right and who's wrong. It's the morality of the situation is ambiguous, right? This isn't ambiguous, okay? There's no ambiguity about it. It's just complex, and that's very different, right? The morality of the situation and the characters is very complex. They're complex in the reasoning and the situations that lead them to do the things that they do, and there's a lot to consider in every single character's actions and decisions, right? And that makes it very complex, and it's moral complexity at its best, but it's also at the same time, no one would ever reasonably argue these characters are good people, but maybe they're grey. You know, maybe they're somewhere in the middle, or maybe they're bad people who've had good reasons to do bad things. And it's really, you know, some of the characters this works for, some of them not as much, but all of them ultimately are quite ambiguous. I mean, even Farah, for example, she just kills people en masse, but like, you look at her and you hear about her past and you think, how many times can you have your bodily autonomy violated like that before you become so broken that you don't care about right or wrong anymore? And does what has happened to you that's led you to become this husk change the morality of what you've done? And these books really just continuously ask this question. They shove horrible shit in your face and they go, look at that, look at that. You know this character that I've made you love? Look at them do that. How do you feel now? How do you feel now? And it kind of makes you feel like realize, you know, you always look at these people in real life, you go, oh, how could some dude make excuses for, how could some mother make excuses for a son who murdered someone or something like that, you know? And, you know, it kind of makes you empathize a bit with that. It kind of makes you realize you are capable of these biases. You are capable of making excuses for terrible shit. And you're not any different to anyone else. And there's art in that. There's real artistry in that. And yeah, I just thought that element of these books was absolutely fucking phenomenal, because I totally condemn the actions of many of these characters, but I don't hate them. I don't dislike them. And that is complexity. I've kind of gone on about this one theme, and moral complexity kind of as a theme. But there are other themes in this book that were quite clear, and I'm not going to run on about them because there's no point. When you're talking about themes and stuff like that, it's got to be its own video, you know. But there are a lot of themes in this book, like power corrupts, you know, about the harsh realities of war. You know, the big one that I mentioned many times, change is hard. How much, you know, there's a lot of questions of free will in this book. How much free will does someone have to be a good person, to do the right thing when their circumstances are a certain way? How much free will does Logan have in the things that he does, considering that he is saddled with this monster inside of him that does want to come out? How much of that is his environment, right? Your environment shapes who you are is another theme. A lot of these characters completely changed as people by the circumstances around them and their environment, but it seems like they have very little free will in changing themselves, right? Most of who they are was beaten into them. They were crafted, they were sculpted by hardship and the world around them, by hatred and bitterness and vengeance and violence. And how much good shaped who they were? Is there any good to be had here? So your environment shapes who you are. How much free will do you have? These are two themes that were kind of very prevalent, I thought, that were quite heavily tied together. You know, I do see this book as a book that is quite thematically strong. I thought that there were a lot of themes and ideas that ran through the book from the beginning all the way to the end. I didn't really want to talk about themes or anything like that until it got to the end, because you never really know for sure. And it's especially with this book, because this series of books, because these books are weird. They feel like the first book is the beginning, the second book is the middle, and the third book is the end. They don't feel like 3 books. They feel like one long book that are split up into 3 because Joe Abercrombie did not want to sell the world's first £150 book, right? That really is really prevalent, I thought, and really means you have to consider the trilogy as a whole, not as individual pieces. And it significantly changes how you think about the themes and ideas, right? Because it doesn't feel like there's themes and ideas that are specific to each book. They're prevalent throughout the whole series, and they run through the series as a whole. So they begin with the character arc in the first book, they continue into the character arc in the second book, and then they kind of peak in the character arc in the third book, and they continue throughout the whole series. Just want to say, the themes in this book, there's a lot of them that I noticed that were very clear to me. I could probably go through the book and try and analyse it and look for more, but that's not really what I try and do. When I read, I do consider the themes of a story. I know a lot of people, they see fantasy as entertainment and novels as entertainment. For me, they're not just that, they're art, and they have artistic value, and a good storyteller is trying to tell you something. Okay, and even if they're not trying to tell you something, you can find your own meaning in a story that isn't intended to be there, and you read it and you find meaning beyond the words. And for me, that is something I always try to do, but I don't try to push myself to do it, okay? Because if the themes don't come to me, if they're not there for me when I'm just reading it, I kind of just assume that they're not there for me, you know? And I don't kind of read into it too much, and I just try and enjoy reading the book. But for me, this book, they were coming off the page, you know, they were like heat off of a fire. There was a lot of ideas and themes. Characters are quite introspective in this book, which is usually a surefire way of telling that an author's trying to tell you something. The characters would ask questions themselves a lot. Logan would ask himself, can a man change? And Glockter would often ask himself, why do I do this? And this is thematics at work, and this is the thematics in the text as opposed to the subtext. And to me, they're obvious signifiers that the author's trying to tell you something. And to me, the themes are very prevalent in this book. They're very clear to me. And usually when I read a book, they're not as clear. Now, I've read the Brandon Sanderson books previously, the Miss One books, and I thought the themes in this were quite clear and quite obvious, and I didn't really talk about them in my videos because I just didn't really see the point. Because it's not really the main thing I enjoyed about those books. But this, for me, the themes were a massive part of my enjoyment, and I really thought they elevated the story. That brings me to the conclusion of this video. I want to say that this series of books, the first book, I think I mentioned in the first video, meant a lot to me. I have a bit of a weird relationship with it. I picked this book up, the first law book, The Blade itself. I picked it up when I was going through a pretty severe period of depression in my life. Now, I have depression. It's a lens through which I view everything, unfortunately, which is kind of how it works when you have it, but I'm doing a lot better now than I was. And to me, this book is a signifier of my improvement in life, right? When I first got this book, I started reading it and I just could not enjoy it. Okay, I could not enjoy it. I just couldn't enjoy it. And at the time, I just thought I didn't like the book. And you know, the truth was, I was depressed. I couldn't find enjoyment in anything in life. And I was looking back at that time in my life, and I think, you know, everything that I did not like. And there's a few things I enjoyed. There's a few works of fiction during that time that really took me out of my depression, really connected to me and really made me feel like I was living again. Because this is the thing about depression that a lot of people don't realise. Sorry if it's getting a bit heavy, but depression, for me anyway, I'm not going to tell you what other people's experiences are, but depression for me is like an utter lack of anything. It's a total lack of motivation to do anything, to get out of bed, to be happy, to enjoy anything, to smile. Everything feels like it's on low volume. You can't enjoy things, and you're basically just existing. And it's very difficult to do anything about depression because you feel like everything's on mute, and you're because you have no motivation to get better. And it's works of fiction that drew me out of my depression, alongside a lot of help from my amazing partner, who put up with a lot of shit from me, quite frankly, when I was very depressed and didn't care about anything. And you know, it hurts to say it, but I didn't care about anything, and that included her at the time. I mean, I did, but a lot of the time I was incapable of being an actual partner, the partner she deserved. And I am one of the luckiest people in the world that she chose to stay with me, and stick with me through that period of my life, in a time when I don't know if I could say that I would have done. And so this is a book that connects me to a very important part of my life for me. You know, a very difficult, a trying time in my life when even getting out of bed seemed like an insurmountable task. And it's hard to explain how much this book means to me, because when I went and I read this book now, I loved every second of it immediately. And this book was like realizing how I'd changed as a person, how much better I'd gotten as a person, how much better I'd gotten with my depression, and how little it was affecting me now. Because from the beginning of this book, from the first chapter, I was hooked, and I loved every second of it, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And this book made me realize something. It made me realize I'm living again, and that is a beautiful thing. And I will always love this first book, The Blade Itself, probably the most out of all of them, for that reason. And okay, I know what you're thinking. You're watching this and you're saying, "Oh, he's super biased, obviously, because he's got a massive love for this book." Yes, you're right. I'm massively biased towards this series of books, almost incredibly so. Probably more biased than anyone else for any other series of books ever. So do not look at this video as a critical review. I think you'll very clearly see I'm not criticizing this book in this, because there's quite frankly no point, because all of the things that I didn't like about this book are completely overshadowed by all the things I did. I think the things in this book that are great, in this series that are great, is so great and so well done that it completely overshadows any negatives. Okay? And besides, these videos aren't supposed to be critical. They're supposed to be diaries for me to put down my thoughts and ideas of things and books that I'm reading. And they help me permanently entrench those ideas and thoughts in my head forever. I have this problem where it's probably part of my depression, but it's where I really, if I watch something or read something in quick succession, so if I watch a TV show in one evening, the events jumble up and I don't remember much in the long term. I'll have to watch it again. When I do this, it permanently transfers these ideas and thoughts into my head, and they never go away. So that's one of the main reasons I make these videos. But in conclusion, these books, I thought they were phenomenal. Okay, all of them. The series is unlike anything I've ever read. The character writing is incredible. I thought the thematics were stellar. The plot ain't bad either. Pretty much has all of the important things that I want out of a story, and probably many fantasy readers want out of a story. These books, they're brilliant. I'm biased, I'll admit it. I'm mindlessly biased towards these books. I think they're fucking awesome. I think they slap. Joe Abercrombie is a phenomenal author, and I have a massive amount of respect for him. These are the first books that he wrote, to my understanding. These are his first... The Blade itself, I think, is his first book. I'm going to fact check that. Yeah, this is his first book. The Blade itself, sorry, was his first book. Okay. The first whole trilogy are his first 3 books. Incredible. First 3 books. These are the first 3 books he's ever written. Well, I suppose he may have written other things as well in the past that didn't get published. But for his first published book, this is an absolutely standout, stellar example of a first novel, and a second and a third. If I was going to put these books into a tier list or something, S tier. They're all S tier. I love every single one of them. Yeah. If you watched all these videos, thank you for watching them. I will go on to continue to make videos about more books that I read. I've actually finished another book and I'm in the process of reading another, so I'm a bit behind on the novel side of things, but that is because I was letting a book sink in. So, yeah. I felt like this book deserved, Last Argument of Kings deserved me to let it sink in. I have finished reading Spaceman of Bohemia, and I'm currently reading Warbreaker. The books I will make videos on. I do not know when. It's almost Christmas at the time of reading this out and kind of going through this video, so it's hard to say. And also I'm working on lots of other things at the moment. I'm working on 2 tabletop RPG systems at once, and one with a group of friends and one by myself, and also lots of other creative stuff that I'm doing, and just kind of writing and stuff in general in my spare time. Lots of things going on, so the videos might slow down a bit. I'm still aiming for 1 video a month. I'm probably not going to hit that, but that's what I'm aiming to do. If I read some short books, I might be able to pop off some more videos. But yeah, thank you for watching this with me. I hope this one was a bit more engaging than the others. I wrote a bit of a script for this. I don't know if you can tell, but I was kind of reading off the script for some of it. But I was probably about 50% sticking to the script, 50% kind of like spitting it out. But yeah, hopefully this is a bit better, a bit more readable, a bit easier to listen to and watch. And I hope that the things that I'm saying are a bit more concise than in previous videos. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.